give me one shot here on a blue chip stock, believe me, Kevin, the only problem you're gonna have is that you didn't buy more.
Nobody knows if the stock is going to go up, down, sideways, or in circles.
What's going on, NBA draft fans? Your boys are back, the Wolves of Ball Street. It is the Draftdaq NBA Draft Podcast. My name is Corey Tulliba, and I am here, as always, with my co-host, Albert. Garbage time, Gim. Albert, what's happening, bud?
What's going on, everybody? It's good to be back. We've got a doozy of a pod today. Gonna have a lot going on. We're covering somebody really exciting. I know last year we kind of waited for like the top dudes and we waited till the very, very end. But this year we're going something different because year by year we want to keep things fresh. So if you thought we were doing some obscure prospect today, you're wrong, and you should be excited because we're about to get down.
Yeah, and you know what? I think it's good that we're doing some of the big name guys early because it'll be fun to revisit them in a few months after we've had time to digest everything. We'll have seen the NCAA tournament and how that played out. We'll get to watch some workout footage in the gym with some of these guys. Maybe we'll have more intel so we can kind of look back and talk ourselves into reordering our board 14 different ways between now and then. So we are covering Jabari Smith Jr., very popular prospect, Auburn power forward, big, 18 years old right now, super young. He'll be freshly turned 19 years old on draft night, just old enough to buy cigarettes and lotto tickets. He is 6'10", 210 pounds, a reported 7'1" wingspan. He is averaging 15.2 points, 6.8 rebounds, 1.7 assists to 1.7 turnovers, 1 block, and 1.3 steals. He is shooting 42.8% from the field, 39.7% from the three-point line, 80% from the free throw line, 56 true shooting percentage. He's got a PER of 23.5. A little preseason stock listing for Jabari Smith Jr. ESPN had him at 7. SB Nation had him at 7. Basketball News had him at 5. Bleacher Report had him at 7. Tankathon had him at 8. He had an average price of 6.8. He was number 7 on the Draftdaq initial player offerings in the preseason. Then December hit, and the Jabari Smith hype went crazy. ESPN moved him up to 3. Tankathon moved him up to 3. Basketball News moved him up to 2. Bleacher Report moved him up to 3. Sports Illustrated had it at 1. No Ceilings, we had him at 3. He had an average stock price of 2.5. Moved up to number 3 on the Draftdaq. However, things got even crazier because between now and December, he has even moved up even more. ESPN has him at 3 still, but The Athletic has him at 1. Tankathon has him at 1. Basketball News has him at 1. Bleacher Report has him at 2. No Ceilings, we had him at 3 still. Average stock price of 1.8. Currently ranked number 2 on the February Draftdaq that we released at No Ceilings. But that 1.8 average stock price was tied with Chet Holmgren for the lowest stock price. But Chet had as many number 1 finishes and more number 2 finishes, so he had the tiebreaker. But the trend is that people cannot get enough of Jabari Smith Jr. He keeps rising up the board. Started at 7. He is down to number 2, and he is fighting and clawing his way for that top spot as a consensus prospect. So, Albert, I ask you, at an average price of 1.8, currently ranked number 2 by consensus, is Jabari Smith Jr. stock price too high, too low, or is it just right?
I'm going to go ahead and say that I feel like it's just right. The reason why is because, I mean, at this point of the season, we're kind of in that place where people have fallen in love with Jabari Smith. And, you know, I think all of it is fine. If you're in love with him, great. If you're not, I mean, I think you'll find very few people who don't love Jabari Smith. And Corey, I think one of the big picture things I've been thinking about today is that I think we have to remember to think about Jabari Smith within the context of this year's draft. This is not the strongest draft we've had in years.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very curious to see how this draft ends up in 5 to 10 years. But considering the draft and considering all those different factors, I get it. I totally get it. He's a really fun and aesthetically kind of pretty, beautiful player to watch. So I'm there. I think I don't remember where I had him on my board, to be honest, but I get why we have him at 3 because we have a lot of big Chet and Paolo fans. So I think it's just right because he's right there in the mix with those two guys.
I also think that it's fair. However, I wouldn't be scared to buy at this price. So I completely understand the Jabari Smith height. I understand why he's had such a rise, more so than probably any of the top prospects, save for maybe Jaden Ivey. But he's right now, Jabari is much more in that consensus top 3 conversation. But it does seem high for me. And like you said, we have to think about this in the context of nobody has really agreed upon who the number 1 prospect was. It was very much most outlets had Cade as the number 1 guy last year. This is much more like 2020 when we really didn't know if it was going to be LaMelo, Anthony Edwards, or James Wiseman going number 1 up until draft night. And I don't think we'll have a clear picture necessarily up until that point. But it's fair. If Jabari's your guy, I totally get it. It's a little rich for my blood right now. I got to spend my money a little bit more wisely for Jabari at that price point. But let's get into it. Let's talk about why Jabari has risen up boards in such a crazy fashion. We like to start with the shooting, and I almost feel like you have to start with the shooting with Jabari Smith Jr. So, Albert, talk to me about Jabari as a shooter.
It's really technically sound. Is the first thing that I want to say. It feels like Jabari Smith as a shooter, you can kind of tell that his dad played in the league because it just seems like the kid grew up like taking 9 million shots in the gym and really honing his craft as a shooter. And you know, to the bigger picture, I think a lot of different aspects of his game show a lot of polish. But the shooting's pretty, man. It's just what I wrote was smooth shooter with like 9 O's. Just a really pretty shooter. It's fun to watch. Aesthetically, it's pleasing. At his size, the way that he shoots it, it looks nice. There are times when I don't know, like I don't know if I've ever heard anyone like I don't think I've heard anyone say it, but I feel like I've seen it in print somewhere. But like I really do hope people don't compare him to Kevin Durant because that feels like a mighty, mighty stretch to me. And we'll get into why a little bit later because the shooting is great. The shooting is fantastic. Shooting the mid-range shooting. Now, I will say, I think there's some things he can work on with the mid-range shooting and overall, but his catch and shoot shooting is awesome. I believe the stats that I had on that was like on his threes, 76% of them are assisted, but he is shooting about 40%, which is really awesome. But yeah, I feel like if I don't want to start with a negative, but with all the great things that I said about his shooting, the one area of his shooting that I think needs a lot of work, but will be there, I think, eventually is the off the dribble stuff. I think there's a lot of room for growth there, but it's a pretty shooter and technically really, really sound.
And he's got that high release. He's 6'10". It's
right.
super hard to contest it. What's funny is that I remember when we were preparing preseason to talk about JD Davison. There was some crossover because they played AAU together on that same AAU team. And I remember watching him and being intrigued by it. This is when I started really diving into the 2022 class over the summer. And the shot was very inconsistent. I was like, he'll be able to shoot it one day. And then right away, the college season starts. And he's fucking throwing flames at the net, like NBA Jam style. And I was like, oh, that is an unbelievably rapid improvement that I was not expecting. And I think that's one of the reasons that he has flown up boards so much by evaluators, because I think the rate that he has improved has been pretty tremendous. And when you look at his age and you see how many other ways he has to continue to grow, you see why there's so much intrigue by this kid. I agree with you. The off the bounce stuff, obviously not as consistent or as fluid as the catch and shoot stuff, the off the ball stuff. I haven't seen Kevin Durant yet, but I have seen like people talking about him in the context of like Paul George. And
Oh,
I think that looking at him as that kind of wing
hmm,
scares me,
mhm,
because those guys are like crazy shifty with the ball,
right.
and Jabari Smith is not
Not.
he's not even regular shifty with the ball. He's functional as a ball handler, and you see him in the way, like when he's hit some pretty crazy shots off the bounce, like running in transition, stopping on a dime, hitting a three. He's able to go behind the, between his legs and pull up every now and then. But it's not like, hey, let me cross this dude out of his boots to create separation. It's more like, let me just kind of lull the defender to sleep, and then I could just shoot right over him because I'm so tall. I have such a high release point and such a pretty stroke that I can get it off.
Right.
So I don't see him in this mold of like wing player that's like, hey, give him the ball and let him create from the perimeter. Not to say that he doesn't have a little bit of that in him, especially in the NBA with space, but I don't think he's that like I think if your plan is to give him the rock and tell him to be this guy who's like busting out combo moves, I think things can go south pretty quickly. But as a
Yeah.
shooter, I mean, look, 40%, high volume, and it looks good. I feel like it's going to go in every time he pulls it.
Right.
And as a pick and pop threat, he is going to be just absolutely filthy in the NBA. And if he gets put into a pick and roll with the right partner, he could really, really walk himself into some easy shooting at the next level, and he could be devastating. I think the mid range shot looks good. I like when he faces up, jab step,
Mhm.
jab step. That he doesn't have to like do too many crazy things. Just like I said, I'm tall and I could just shoot right over you. It reminds me, a little bit of that kind of like Kevin Garnett working in those spots where sometimes it's better to be, play it simple. He's shown himself capable of kind of like getting in the post and hitting turnarounds. I think that'll be there for him as well. So obviously, like, there's not much to be out on the shot. Like,
Mhm.
I think that is probably one of the reasons in a league that is obsessed with size, versatility, shooting, the fact that he is big, smooth, and such a good shooter. It's hard to see him not find, a valuable role and be a
Yeah.
really, big contributor to winning at some point, just based off those attributes alone.
Right, right. No, I know our listeners give us a lot of crap for agreeing a lot, but I had the same stuff in my notes. For me, I was like, what I wrote in my notes is anytime he has to dribble more than 3 times, it gets a little dicey. As you mentioned, when he catches it at the elbow, at the nail, he can turn face up. He could do a lot of different things there, right?
Yeah,
Something we'll talk about later is even the passing and the playmaking, which you see a little bit of. One of my biggest critiques with him, though, it's I think all connected with the shooting too. I like the shooting, of course. Stuff looks pretty, but I wonder, Corey, I wanted to ask you, I mean, we could talk about this. I don't know if he's weaponizing his shooting enough. And what I mean by that is I think he's only taken it to the basket like 42 times this season. Just looking at the advanced stats or whatever. And I wish he would use the threat of the jumper a little bit more to take it all the way to the rack and get more, take more free throws. I think he's only averaging 4 free throws per game right now. Now, of course, like I don't want to. We can't look at these players like we look at NBA players. There are a lot of different reasons, right? The spacing in college is worse. He's playing with a gigantic center and Walker
yeah,
Kessler that the paint is much tighter. It's not the same. So I do want to have that caveat in there, but I do wonder if he is weaponizing the shooting enough, and I think that's something that I'm hoping he continues to work on, and he continues to leverage in terms of his offensive attack. Because I mean, if we look at it just objectively, the shooting is so good. I'm just hoping he can use that more to his advantage. And then, and as you mentioned, like I don't think he'll ever be a Paul George, Kevin Durant type of guy, because I just don't think the handle will ever be there. Like I think as you mentioned, sorry, the handle is functional. He can do things with the ball in his hands, but to get like Paul George is an extremely fluid athlete with really, really good handle. Kevin Durant, I mean, forget about it. So, um, I just think it'll be really difficult for Jabari to ever get to that level, with the shake and the handle and all that. So I'm definitely with you on that for sure.
Yeah, he's a little stiff. It seems like, some yoga, some flexibility stuff, loosen things up would really help him as a mover. And
Right.
I think that, having Kessler in the paint, and I know he's been trying to space it out a little bit more as of late, but he's not a consistent threat from out there. He's not spending a ton of his time out on the perimeter. Obviously, that clogs things up. You have an extra big. The NBA will have more spacing. So I do think that, when he is facing up at the elbow or the 3-point line, he does have that 1-2 dribble long strides that he'll be able to get to the rim and use the leverage of a little pump fake to, create some space, or if a guy plays tight, just kind of use that first step to beat him to the spot. But I think that, you mentioned his finishing. And if you look at his overall finishing numbers, because he is super efficient in transition and good at finishing in those situations, because he runs hard
Right.
as hell down the floor and he's got good hands and he's
Right.
athletic enough, his finishing looks like it's pretty good. But in the half court, he's been
Mhm.
really bad as a finisher. And you see
Right.
that kind of manifest in his shooting percentage. While he's shooting 40% from three, he's shooting less than 43% from the field against college competition. And a fair, amount of that is his struggles finishing at the rim. There are reasons, certainly. He's probably the best floor spacer that team has. Like we said, Kessler's in the paint, but a lot of it is he's just a little stiff down there. He doesn't. I just don't think he has that smooth flexibility to kind of change things up. The creativity, and he's not like a crazy bouncy athlete.
Yeah. Right.
Like
Yep.
if he has like a little room, little runway, yeah, he can get up there, and I'm sure he'll have his fair share of posters, because that dude is a dog and he'll go at you, right? He's not afraid. But there are concerns with his self-creation ability and the fact that if he's going to be this 3-level scoring threat that people are talking about him as, mentioning him with some of the names that we've mentioned on this podcast, talking about having him as the number 1 pick overall, that finishing would scare me from a big man. And I know that shot is beautiful and translatable, and I got no doubt about that. And I understand the 3-level scoring projection, but if you're counting on him to be your number 1 guy as a 3-level scorer, that gives me a little bit of pause.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you. Corey, the way that I think about him right now, his finishing at the rim, the lack of creativity, the lack of pop, in some ways, and I know it's different, and I'll get into it. Listeners, don't crucify me for it, but if you look at RJ Barrett and the way that RJ struggles at the rim at times, it is because he just kind of goes in a straight line. There is a lack of creativity. There is a lack of pop for sure. Now, the one caveat I'll say, and the reason why I may be a little bit more optimistic on Jabari and his finishing, is that Jabari has great, great touch.
Yeah.
I mean, and we see it in the shooting. His touch is unbelievable. There are even a couple of possessions I saw him finishing with the offhand, and it looked pretty nice. Now, it wasn't perfect. It wasn't like the most beautiful offhand finish ever. He's not Kyrie Irving, but
Yeah.
it was pretty enough, And so I'm with you, Corey. It definitely is a concern right now. And also on top of that, he's just not getting to the free throw line as much as I'd like either. But I think more than it being a weakness, at least in my mind, more than it being a weakness, I think it's just an area that he needs to grow. like an area of growth rather than a weakness, because I feel like there's room for him to really improve on that. And then if you start to couple that with the shooting and stuff, then you can get a little bit more excited. And I think ultimately that's why he is where he is in terms of big boards and mock drafts and things like that. Because I think because the shooting is so good and the touch is so good, it leaves you believing that he could eventually get better around the rim as well.
And the flashes are there. He's and I
Right.
think that he's so young that you are buying into those flashes and you're not overreacting to the fact that, he is really struggling to finish. And the fact that he has improved at such a young age already means that the kid is probably a tireless worker, and that's something to buy into. And the kid's passion cannot be questioned. So I get it. To me though, there is something natural about the way that some guys that is just innate that you just have by the time you get to this level. And I'm not sure that he can develop, not that I just think it's hard for anybody to develop that uh, by the time you reach, college. I think it's just something that your movement patterns you already have. But it's there. Like the flashes are there, and we'll see. There's still college season left to be played, and if he has a big showing in the tournament, it's like he absolutely can just blow the doors off this thing and take the number one spot running. You mentioned the passing. How do you feel about him as a passer?
Um, yeah, sorry. I was gonna say. Oh, the one caveat to that, Corey, really quickly, if I can. The one caveat to that what I was thinking about is that I think part of the reason why you might be feeling the way that you feel now, it may be totally unconnected. I'm just thinking out loud. I also feel like he's not fully grown into his body yet. There's still something awkward about his body, and I think and I'm wondering if in 2 to 3 years he looks way more fluid as he's more adjusted to his body. Is kind of what I was thinking, both like in terms of everything, right? The stiffness, the muscle, like everything. So that's just something I was thinking just in my head. I wonder if maybe he looks that way and feels that way because he's not fully adjusted to his body, was something I was thinking about. In terms of passing, okay, so if you watch his games, I think he's not gonna wow you. He's not. That's my thing with him being like a number one option. I don't know if he has like that in him to be a constant creator. Like we use Jokic's name, I think, way too much sometimes because there are very few guys who are gonna be a Jokic ever, right? But
Mhm.
with Jabari, there are flashes, right? Like even in transition, you see him making some passes. It's like, what the hell was that, right? There are times when they're against like a zone defense, he'll catch a middle and he'll make the right read at the nail, right? He'll make nice reads off of that. Whatever screens are going on underneath, he can make the nice reads. I just don't think there was anything like ridiculously special about his passing, which was in my head, which is not a bad thing. Like I don't want people to hear this thing like, oh, Albert's low or down on his passing. Like, no, not necessarily. I think he's a good passer. I just don't think he's like some unbelievable passer is I think where I land. But then again, there are some really, really nice moments where he'll read the weak side. He'll read what the defense is giving him. He'll make the like quick reads too. That I saw at least. So I think that's just how I feel. Like I feel good about it. I'm not amazed by it, and I don't think it's bad. Is exactly how I feel so far.
Yeah, well, the passing from like the nail and everything. This kid like is a devastating zone buster for a college team. Like, and
Exactly.
you see like he could just catch phase, hit the little shot from the free throw line. He could obviously space it out by playing the wing. He can go porch to porch on the baseline and hit the little bunnies, and then it leads to the passes where especially when you got a guy as big as Edwards down there, where you can play a little high low with him. In the half court, again, I don't see him as like that pick and roll creator as a ball handler. I I think at that point, like it has a lot to do with the handle being stiff to where, all right, if he's getting blitzed, is he going to take a retreat dribble and then like take advantage and understand where the openings are from guys that are rotating? I don't see stuff like that. But I also don't think that's why you're drafting him as a friend, or personally, that's would be my philosophy. That's not what I would be drafting him for. I would be drafting him as a play finisher, not as a play initiator, because I think when the ball swings to him, wherever the case happens to be, pick and pop or just dribble penetration or in transition, whatever it is, I just think he's so good in that role that the expecting him to create and pass, like, I just want him to be a ball mover. I don't want the ball to stick, and I don't think the ball sticks with him necessarily. Sure, sometimes he gets the ball and he'll back you down and hold on to it for a few seconds before getting shot off. And certainly, as the college season has gone along, he's garnering more and more attention from scouting reports. Now everybody knows Jabari Smith is the guy, right? So you would like to see a little bit of that feel because Paolo's showing it, right? Chet, I think, has always kind of shown it. And if that's his main competition, even Jaden Ivey is showing it now a lot more. And you're starting to see those like, oh, Jaden Ivey, maybe you can put the ball in his hands, make him a primary. You're starting to see that a little more. So when you compare him to some of these top guys, I don't think Jabari Smith kind of stacks up in the same way. The question is, like, is he going to be so good as a shooter from multiple spots on the floor that you don't really need him? And if you're pairing him up with a lot of these teams are at the top of the lottery, do they already have those guys? And you're going to actually use Jabari as a play finisher, and that's where you're going to see him be this, crazy volume scorer.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm definitely with you, man. I feel I like the point that you made at the end. In terms of his role fit on the next level. Like even if you look at his numbers, like so much of it is assisted right now. As much as like when you watch the highlights, it seems like he does so much with the ball in his hands, but a lot of the scoring that he's doing is assisted. And I think that's something that's important for us to emphasize. And he's not going to be the only one. I think Chet's going to be like that too. Once draft time comes along, those numbers are going to look kind of similar in that way. But I'm with you. Like I think the biggest thing that we keep coming back to is like the creation part of it all. I think it's going to be really difficult for him to do that because of, once again, the handle and the shake and all those things. And also, I know we mentioned it kind of in passing. He's not a plus athlete at all. And not in my mind at all. Like I think eventually we'll get to the defensive side of it where he shows good instincts and stuff like that, but he's not some freak athlete. And I don't think he ever will be, even when he gets into his final form and he, matures into his body. That vertical pop, I just don't think is going to be there. So I'm totally with you on that. And I do definitely see him as a guy who's going to be really reliant on a guy maybe like a Jaden Ivey. Not that they'll be on the same team, but you know what I mean? Like he's not going to be a number one.
So that he's interesting when you do talk about his athleticism, because he doesn't have that crazy vertical pop. It's not bad.
Right.
It's not bad. He could get up and put it down on you again, though, when he has runway and whatnot. But he is, and this could be a good segue talking about him defensively a little bit. When he is defending the perimeter, he is super athletic for a guy his size in the way that he moves. And maybe it's not the bounce, maybe it's not the vertical stuff, but as a just guy who can move on the floor, hell yeah, that dude, he's smooth and athletic. Because when he's out on the perimeter, and I think that he can guard almost every position, I mean, he's suffocating dudes, and he is intense. He is sliding his feet. He's switching his stance. I mean, I think that, like he could even get skinny and get up and over around screens. I mean, he's got good timing on contests. So I do think athletically, when you look at him from the perspective of like, is he a functional basketball athlete? There certainly are spots where he does grade out really well, even if it's not that like highlight reel kind of athleticism that Jaden Ivey has. It's his athleticism on the defensive end on the perimeter, I think, really shines bright.
I'm 100% with you. The biggest thing that stood out to me is for a guy his size, he freaking loves getting into a stance, which is hard to see. You don't see a lot of 6'10" guys who get into a stance as consistently as he does. And it's not like he just gets into a stance to like, because like, okay, Corey, you're a high school basketball coach, so I'm sure you've seen this a million times. First game of the season, right? Everyone's locked in after the a little preseason. Everyone's ready to go. First game, first quarter. Everyone's in a goddamn stance. Everyone's talking. Everyone's pointing, being communicating on the floor, and then over
Yep.
time, guys start standing upright and they get a little nonchalant, talking so much on defense, and you see a little change in behavior. And I think the thing that Jabari Smith amazes me with is how consistent he is, with not just in terms of getting into a stance, but his focus, his energy, the buy-in defensively is unbelievable. On-ball stuff, off-ball stuff, help defense. As you mentioned, guarding out in the perimeter at that size, the movement in his hips, which is strange. Like that's the thing which is why for me, I think it keeps coming back to the thing where like, I think defensively he's way more mature. As an of an athlete, if that makes sense, and then offensively, I think he just needs to catch up a little bit. Is kind of how I feel, and that's why I feel like he could get there. It will, at least in terms of like finishing the rim and like even some of the movement stuff. I feel like that could eventually get there. But if we're just talking simply on defense, like I think he's averaging like a block per game. A
it's
block per
1.0.
game, which is it's not unbelievable, but maybe he's only at a block per game because Kessler's averaging like 14 per game. So that's something to keep in mind as well. But I really love Jabari as a defender, and like we started with the shooting, but his defense might be just as good as the shooting.
Yeah, certainly the perimeter defense. I think that playing next to Kessler definitely limits him as a rim protector because one, you don't really want to take him away from guarding the perimeter because he is so effective at it. And then like you said, like Walker Kessler is legitimately averaging like 4 blocks a game, right? So how many more blocks are there for everybody else to go around? Like they're with a guy like that, like your scheme is to force them into your big man, and like you're putting Jabari Smith out on the perimeter, hounding guards, forcing them into those spots. Like that's a legit thing. So I do think that if he wasn't playing with him, that he would be averaging a little bit more. But obviously, he's not that level of shot blocker that puts him with Chet or Mark Williams or his teammate. So I do think that defensively he's about as solid as they come. And when you look at the two-way versatility with the shooting, I mean, that's it, because you do have that question with Paolo, right? And I don't necessarily have that question as much so as maybe some other people do. I think Paolo's been really good on the ball. I think even off the ball, he's usually in the right spots. I just think he doesn't keep his head on a swivel, and sometimes he loses his man off the ball. But he knows where to be. But I think that's the reputation. And I think it's, because of the fact that sometimes he gets a little spacey, it's a legitimate thing to worry about, especially at the next level. If you're projecting him to take on, a big offensive load, is he going to be a guy who could defend for 35 minutes of NBA basketball? I don't know. But I do know that Jabari Smith's going to. And I know he's going to do it with some fuck you in him. Like there are times where he's literally like up in, like he'll force a turnover, and he's like up in your shit, like clapping in your face. He's like a guy that, like, if somebody did that at the pickup game, like you would get into a fight with. Like he's got that energy, and you hate that when he's not on your team. But if he is on your team, like you are going to ride for that dude as hard as you can. And that energy is infectious. And when it comes from your leader, from your number one guy, everybody is going to buy in. Like you mentioned, it's easy for teams to start out the season early and really buy into things. And then as the season goes along, sometimes if you're not having success or whatever, it's easy to fall out of those habits. Jabari Smith is going to bring those habits every night. And from a culture standpoint, that's something you want. He has those intangibles, those winning attributes, things that everybody is going to love. Now, I want to ask you something, because this is something I've been workshopping. I feel like this is a good moment to bring it up. Jabari Smith is kind of locked into this consensus number 2, number 3 spot right now, fighting for number 1. He's got this versatility, right, for the NBA. He's the leader. He's got this. Is there a chance, though, that he's this year's Jalen Suggs, where we're getting hype on the college intangibles and the leadership and some of the college production, but there are signs that maybe, there are some guys that we're just overthinking, and since he seems safe, we're ready to kind of put him above those guys.
So the main reason why I want to say no is because I think the biggest difference between Suggs and Jabari. So I actually love the connection that you made here, Corey, because I do think teams will look at him that way. He seems like a very good teammate, rah-rah, team chemistry, leadership, voice in the room type of guy, right? I 1,000,000% agree with that. The only difference with Jabari that I think could kind of tip the scales and make him like definitively different from Suggs, he has a clear defined skill for me. I think Jalen Suggs, he was a guy that was more of a football player, a guy who's still figuring things out offensively, even defensively. I think he's still like learning, growing, developing. Jabari's going to be, I think, in my mind at least, I think he might be a dead-eye shooter from day one, right? Or at least be a very good shooter. So I think the only reason why I'm going to say no is because I feel like because of the shooting and the defense, he's going to walk into the league with a role, and not just a role per se, but a clear defined skill that he can kind of hang his hat on is the only reason why I'll say no.
And I will say that Suggs is going to be very good, and he's been playing really well lately.
Correct.
The thing I'm drawing, and I totally understand your perspective, and I think I agree with it. Like Suggs, it was like, I don't know, the hit-ahead passes, maybe the defense, I guess, were his best skills. Like off in the half court, there was nothing for him to hang his hat on. Jabari obviously has that, and that is a big difference. So I think that's a really interesting point. But I do this top 4 is crazy this year because, even as set in stone as last year seemed, up until we got that surprise with Suggs dropping to 5, it's like there was less thinking for it. Like you didn't have to think as much for like this one. You really have to figure out some stuff, and these top 4s never shake out with the best players being the guys that are selected. So it's like, who's going to be the guy that isn't what we're hyping him up to be? And are the weaknesses that Jabari has something that we're overlooking just because he does have one standout skill, and the fact that he is finishing at such a poor rate? Are we not thinking about that enough? I don't know. These are the things that by the time we talk about him again in a few months, I'm going to be looking forward to hopefully having some more answers to. But defensively, I think the kid is going to be able to guard multiple positions in the NBA. He's going to be able to switch out onto the perimeter. I think he's going to be able to play and drop. He's going to be able to, whatever scheme you want to play, he'll be able to do. He'll ice screen. Like he's just going to be able to do whatever. And that's valuable, and that will translate. The shot will translate. I think the rebounding, he doesn't have like wild rebounding numbers. I think, again, some of that's probably playing next to a giant human being in the front court with him. But, the kid does go after boards.
Right.
And like, I forgot what game it was. I highlighted it on Twitter a while ago, but it is literally a play that I showed my high school basketball team on how to box somebody out, because he did not get the rebound on this play.
Yeah.
But it was such a badass play because he literally found the guy that was closest to him. It wasn't his man. And he went over and fucking hit him. Yeah. He put his ass into this dude's body, backed him up, and it made way for his teammate to get a board. And I was like, that shit that's not in the box score. But like, he knows that he's got to put a body on dudes. Like, he's a guy that coaches will love because he'll do these things, and he's got the pedigree of having an NBA family. outside of his dad, Kwame Brown is his uncle. So he's got that NBA family. I don't know if having Kwame Brown as your uncle qualifies as a positive or a negative at this point, but that pedigree and being around high-level basketball for so long. So I love the kid. I love the 2A ability. I think that, he will be able to do whatever you ask him to do, and that's something that NBA teams will love, and that's something that's valuable. What NBA teams do you think that would give what team does Jabari give you the best return on investment with?
That's a really good question. I actually don't know. Let me take a look. I was not expecting
So we
this question.
got Detroit, Orlando, Houston
Mhm.
in the top 3. Then you got OKC, Indiana, Sacramento, then San Antonio, Portland, and then the New York Knickerbockers rounding out the top 10.
Dear God. I hate that. I hate it so much. Okay. What I'm thinking is he would be, I think he'd be really fun in Houston. What a young
With
core
Şengün.
to develop
Yep.
there. Yeah. With Şengün, he'll cover Şengün with some of his defense. And then you've got the low post scoring of Şengün and the shooting and the spacing with Jabari
Yep.
to go on with Jalen Green and Josh Christopher and all these guys. That's interesting to me. I mean, OKC, right? I mean, no one believes in Poku, right? We can move on from Poku.
We're
That
moving
could
on
be
from Poku. We
interesting.
are.
Yeah.
We are. We're
Yeah.
moving on from him.
As we should. How do we feel about Indiana? How does he pair with Miles Turner? How do you feel, Corey?
I mean, look, both of those guys can shoot it from the outside. Miles
Right.
Turner protects the rim. Jabari can guard
Mhm.
out on the perimeter. You're running a
Right.
beautiful pick and roll with Halliburton that I absolutely
Right.
adore. A lot of
Mhm.
shooting with Buddy Hield and Duarte. I mean, yeah, that would be sick. I would love that.
Yeah.
Also, Portland's got 2 picks in the top 9 right now, the way the draft order is set. Portland could be interesting for Jabari as well, because, let's say they're keeping Dame and that's the plan. Their forward depth right now is Nas Little,
Greg
Justice
Brown.
Justice Winslow, and Greg Brown.
That'll inspire some. Oh my God.
That is not the best. Who knows what's going to happen with Nurkic, but like their front court depth is thin, to say the least. And I think he would pair really well with Dame. And I think that if you're drafting a rookie at that point, he's a guy that could, impact the game in a way that fits Dame's game really well, because you're just expecting him to play off of him, run pick and roll, catch and shoot. And, Nurkic is a guy who, if they keep him, next year, re-sign him, whatever, he's a guy that, likes to operate down low. So I think Portland is a sneaky fun option for him. Obviously some luck has to happen for them, but maybe they can move up if things happen on draft night. Like, who knows? But thinking Portland could be a fun sneaky destination with Dame and Simons in the backcourt.
Dude, I'm with you. I just feel like he's a guy that it's not going to be difficult to put him into your team. I mean, he's not going to be crying and moaning and throwing a fit if he doesn't get the ball. I think he can, as you mentioned, Corey, he's going to be a finisher more than an initiator. So I think there are a lot of different teams where he makes sense. And especially if you're a rebuilding team and you have like a lead guard creator, why not take a shot? Like OKC, you have SGA, right? Like that's exciting to me too. So
oh yeah,
I'm
Giddy
with you
and
on
SGA
that.
making plays for him.
That's
That's sick. And then,
Dude,
the defensive pressure
him and
of
Dort.
Dort, yeah, that's sick. Sick.
Yeah, that's fun.
And I think that he's a guy that like will thrive kind of irregardless of team context, but he's a guy that could really thrive if he does land in the right spot. But I do think that most of the top options do give him kind of fun guys to play off of. Cade, Orlando, I think a Franz Jabari front court could be really fun. Houston, you have, all the guards there, Jalen Green, Josh Christopher, and then, like you said, Şengün in the front court. I mean, and then OKC, Indiana. I mean, he's got some spots. Sacramento's at number 6. I mean, like DeJounte Murray in San Antonio. I think he's going to pair unless there's like a wild curveball.
Right.
I think he'll pair with somebody that's going to form a really nice partnership. If you're buying stock in Jabari Smith Jr., who may you have bought stock in previously?
I had a lot of trouble with this one. I
It's so
did, and
hard.
maybe yeah, I was thinking like, okay, people are gonna hate this one, but I don't care. Like, what if he is? You remember like when Isaiah Todd was in college, in high school, and he was gonna go to Michigan, and he had all this hype around him and whatever. And then Isaiah Todd, I went in the first. Did he go in the first round last year, or maybe early second? I don't remember actually.
It was 31
Early,
to Washington.
yeah, something
I think
like
it was
that,
like,
right?
yeah.
Like if Isaiah Todd had reached his ultimate, not ultimate, but was as good as we thought he was going to be, would that be Jabari Smith? Right, 6'10", big, can shoot the ball. Obviously Jabari a better defender, much better defender in my mind. But yeah, like I really couldn't think of anyone. Like then I started to think about weird guys, like if Jonathan Bender never got hurt, and I know I brought up Jonathan Bender before too. Sam Perkins, like I don't know, man. Like it's 6'10" to shoot the ball that well. And like people will, I feel like, our generation we may only think of like Sam Perkins on the Sonics, but if you go back and watch like the 90 finals when he was on the Lakers, like a young Sam Perkins with like young Vladdy and stuff like that, it's kind of interesting. But yeah, I don't know, man. It was really hard. It was really freaking I just straight up will say I don't have one then.
No, I like those. And I struggled with it too. And I'm just gonna kind of go with the guys I've thought of from the beginning. And when I say it, it sounds like I'm kind of underselling how I feel about Jabari, but I'm really not, because to me, the two guys that have stuck out for Jabari for me are Joe Smith and Taj Gibson.
Oh, Joe Smith is really good.
And Joe Smith was number one pick. So it's whatever you think of Joe Smith, who had a really long, good career, like he was a number one pick. He had high expectations and whatnot. And then Taj, like you would think of that as an insult, but like Taj is still playing rotation minutes and he's been in the league for a long time. But Jabari is kind of the modern version of these guys because he could stretch it out to 3. But like Taj was that guy who had like this athleticism that every now and then he would really put you on a poster in a serious way. Like he had the bounce and the extension. He was able to guard so many like different positions. I mean, Bulls fans were always clamoring for him to play over Boozer, like always, like because he was just so effective defensively, and he had that little shot out to the elbow that was pretty decent. But Jabari is a better shooter, and he's got it all the way out to the 3-point line. So I kind of think that like modern day Taj Gibson is kind of my comp for Jabari Smith, and I think people will probably think I'm underselling it, but I'm really not, because Taj was so fucking good in his prime. And I think he's another guy that like Taj, like you put him next to one of these elite creators, and like if you get a like all-star version of Taj, he's just easy to put whoever next to whoever, and like he's just gonna fit seamlessly and make the team better. So that's where I'm going with. I'm not going with Kevin Garnett. I'm not going with Paul George. I'm not going with any of that shit. I'm gonna go with all-star Taj Gibson.
Okay, can I just throw one more name at you? Obviously,
Yeah, of course.
none of these are one for one. Just thinking like shooting and everything. Rashard Lewis, that came to mind as you were talking when you brought up like Joe Smith and stuff. Thinking about like a bigger guy who can shoot the ball.
Here's my thing with Rashard Lewis, and I think that we think of him as like kind of like the modern stretch 4, because when he went to Orlando and he was kind of at the forefront of that, firing up all the threes with that finals squad. But he always felt a little wingy to me.
Oh yeah. No, 100%. I agree with you.
And again, like I just don't look at Jabari like that. But I do think when you're talking role, I do think that Rashard Lewis is actually a pretty good one. All right.
Yeah, I'm with you. He was definitely more point.
It's time. Come on, ballpoint. Bic. Let's do it. Let's get it. It's time to sell me this pen on Jabari Smith Jr.
All right, guys. I'm gonna sell you on this pen. What's the best pen you've ever used? I have no idea. Like a Pilot pen? I have no idea. Anyway, but Jabari Smith is a great freaking pen. Jabari Smith is a guy who, I wonder what the tone of this episode is going to be for our listeners, but I do hope like it comes across that we are big fans of his game. Like we Corey, I actually went back and looked at my board. I actually had him number one, which
Yeah.
I think is like really speaks to where my head is at with this top four, as you mentioned. Like I think all these guys are interchangeable, and I was even thinking like it's not unbelievable to think that Jaden Ivey goes number one in this draft. I know like
No, it's
people are
not.
like, what? No way. It could happen, dude. It can really, really happen. But let me focus and talk to you about Jabari Smith, because Jabari Smith, this guy, if you like shooting, he is one hell of a shooter. And a lot of times you think of great shooters, you think of a Steph Curry, you think of a Klay Thompson or Ray Allen. All these wings and guards are who you're going to be thinking about, right? Allen Houston. The list goes on and on and on. Jabari Smith is a 6'10 power forward who shoots the lights out. He's an unbelievable shooter. He is one of the most intense, if not the most intense defender in all the country right now at this point. The way that he goes out, there are times when he'll go out to guard a guard, and he looks like he's enjoying it. Like he's just laughing and having fun. And it's like the best experience in the world for him. So if you're into a guy like that, who is a fluid athlete, not maybe the greatest athlete, but who I think can develop into a really good NBA scorer and a high level NBA defender, then you should be looking to draft Jabari Smith Jr.
And whoever ends up with him, I have no doubt that they're going to love Jabari Smith Jr. and have no regrets. So whether he goes 1 or he goes 6, you know, he's going to get you some bang for your buck. All right. Albert, tell the people where they can find you on the World Wide Web.
On the World Wide Web, you can find me. Well, you'll find me on Twitter at Albert Toe with an E, like the toe on your foot, Gim. You can also find me at GTG NBA, and then on No Ceilings. I write there as often as I can, so you'll find me there, and of course, always on the Draftdat podcast.
Yes, sir. Follow No Ceilings. Head to noceilings.substack.com for free articles delivered directly to your inbox Monday through Friday. We've had some really good ones. We just released the new top 50 consensus rankings for this draft. We've had some really good pieces. We had a piece about from Tyler Rucker about Matteo Spagnuolo, a little foreign relations jump off. We did a little fun Valentine's Day themed article this week to get into the festivities of prospect that we really like watching. So a lot of good stuff going on there. A lot of good stuff going on in the future. It's going to get crazy in the coming months. So you could follow that at No Ceilings NBA on Twitter. You can follow me at Corey Tullaba on Twitter. And make sure that, you share the pod. And if you want to, hit your boys up with a rating. That would be dope. So appreciate you guys listening as always. We're officially in year 2 of the pod. So very exciting stuff. Can't wait to see where we go. Can't wait for the rest of the process. And we will catch you next week as always. Until then, we out.